This is the Brave New Coin Crypto Conversation, hosted by Andy Pickering.
Hi everyone, Andy Pickering here. I'm your host and welcome to the Crypto Conversation, a Brave New Coin podcast where we talk to the people building the future in the Bitcoin, blockchain and cryptocurrency space. My guest today is Monique Bachner. Monique is one of Luxembourg's leading blockchain governance and company law experts. Monique is a legal advisor and consultant in Luxembourg's thriving fintech and blockchain sectors, and Monique has expertise in blockchain governance, securities regulation, and technology and ethics. Monique, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for joining me today.
Thanks, Andy.
Now, Monique, so you're based in Luxembourg, and I believe you're from Sydney originally. But I guess for those listeners who have never visited, Luxembourg is a small country in Western Europe. I think the population is around 600,000, and the country has quite a colourful history, doesn't it?
It does indeed. So Luxembourg is small, 600,000 people who live there, with about another 180,000 who come across the border to work every day from France, Belgium and Germany. Obviously, in the past, it started with very much on the steel sector, which was really the history of the country. And then since a couple of decades, they took off with financial services, well known in the past for things like bank secrecy. Those are now things which are well gone. Bank secrecy was abolished around 6 or 7 years ago, and Luxembourg is a signatory to all of the international exchange of tax treaties now, so it's fully open and moving forward in trying to push the financial services sector as really investment funds and different areas like that, new technologies, fintech, regtech, being at the heart of the European Union. It's really got a lot of opportunities for working closely with traditional financial sector players, whilst being able to take advantage of that smaller ecosystem.
That's right. So I guess that's another way of saying Luxembourg has transformed from, I guess, a small, let's say, European financial hub for nimble global corporations with imaginative tax departments to nowadays very much a thriving fintech hub, right?
Yes. I mean, we are a fund center. Luxembourg is the second largest investment fund center in the world after the US. So a lot of what is done there is a lot of, focus on regulations, legislation, a lot of that based obviously on European directives and things which are done across the EU. But with investment funds regulations like UCITS and AFMD, these platforms are then used to distribute investment funds across the world. So there's a lot of focus on regulation, compliance in those sorts of sectors, which then have made it a natural base for people to use for fintech or regtech solutions to then passport across the EU. Brexit being an obvious example, where firms which were set up in the UK will now need to have a European base to be able to passport their financial services products across the EU. So if they have a fintech or a regtech or even an old school business, they need to find a European hub. And Luxembourg has been very popular for choosing as that hub because it's multilingual, it's very international and quite outward looking.
Yeah, that's interesting, Monique, because I was reading something online a day or two ago that suggested in a post-Brexit environment, there's obviously a number of large UK firms will be perhaps looking at their options, and in terms of moving their locations perhaps outside of the UK and somewhere else in Europe, I think Dublin ranked as the number one new destination, and I was surprised that Luxembourg came in number 2. That's probably not a surprise to you?
No, and actually I think that you have to nuance the figures. There are different sectors which have been affected in different ways as a result of Brexit. So if you would break it down into the types of services, so I think that banks, it's Frankfurt who's number 1. For insurance, it's a mixture of Luxembourg and Brussels. For investment funds, it's a mixture of Luxembourg and Ireland. I'm not sure which other types of entities are moving to Ireland, but you need to break it down by sectors. And basically what they're doing is, whereas they're a traditional hub in the type of service that we are involved in as a business, and then they're gravitating often to those jurisdictions. In other areas, I think in a lot of the sort of non-financial services related startups, they've been looking at Amsterdam, Berlin, Barcelona. So I don't think that the figures really capture all of the different services that have been moving, but definitely all of these cities and countries have had a big impact from it.
Sure. And do you have a take on Brexit from someone that's perhaps closer to the action than I am anyway? What's your high-level take on Brexit and what you think will happen?
Well, I think the whole thing's just really unfortunate and sad. I think that most Europeans are very sad that the Brits are leaving the EU. It is what it is. It's, from the outside looking in, it's a mess. And I wouldn't put my money on any of the options that are out there right now. People will have to deal with it in the financial services sector and fintechs, regtechs. People are got their licenses lined up to move. A lot of money spent on having to restructure different things. But I don't think that the small details of, the ripple impacts will really be known until afterwards. So many little details, which I'm sure that people have not planned for or thought about, and we'll see them afterwards. But yeah, overall, just really sad.
It is sad. I expect there'll be a fairly sharp, short-term negative impact on probably the UK economy, perhaps on the wider EU region as well. What's your assessment there of the kind of short to medium-term economic impact?
I mean, that's what everybody's predicting. You already see it a little bit in the level of the British pound that's getting really attacked. Again, we'll have to see how that pans out, but I think it's a sensible conclusion because it's a major, major political and economic shift for the whole region.
It is. Well, look, let's just switch back to Luxembourg, Monique. What I find interesting about these small, nimble little countries, Malta is one, Luxembourg, I saw that, earlier this year, Luxembourg passed, I think it's called, or released a digital government paper. It's described as an e-government paper. And I guess this is kind of like a digital transformation plan. And I think this has been going on for a little while, but it includes, a sector on blockchain, this 5G. Luxembourg seems to want to digitalize all of the things. The Luxembourg government even wants to enter into an AI partnership with NVIDIA. Now, this is quite technologically forward-thinking stuff. So do we have a blockchain AI enthusiastic government here? What's going on?
Yeah, we have a government who is all over digital, which is great for us. They have been working very closely with other countries across the EU, for example, Estonia. I mean, you'll know Estonia with its e-residency program. Luxembourg actually houses Estonia's e-embassy. There is a backup of the whole country located in Luxembourg.
Wow.
We have the government having recently launched or announced a project to have a government blockchain. So government services will move on to a blockchain solution, which they will be building. We have very strong AI partnerships. You mentioned the one with NVIDIA, which is actually already starting. We have, for example, at the EU level, centres such as one of the European high-speed computers will be set up in Luxembourg. We've got very good infrastructure in and out of the country. We're kind of at the centre of Europe, and we've got a lot of Tier 4 data centers as well as fast internet lines, which make it a good location for setting up some of this infrastructure. But yeah, the government is really keen on digitizing new digital ministry as well, which has been announced to separate that from some of the traditional ministries and give it its own line of responsibilities and that they can go their own in different initiatives.
Fantastic. So, Monique, you're an expert on crypto and securities regulation, and I think you've contributed to a number of papers in this area. Well, I know you have because I've read some of them. So, Think Block Tank is a Luxembourg-based non-profit. So you're part of that. I think there's blockchain and DLT experts from around 15 countries. Most of them are probably EU countries, I think. Is that right?
Yeah, so it was kind of a reaction to the fact that when you talk crypto and blockchain and regulation and securities laws, that all you hear is how we test, how we test, how we test. And we're like, well, you know what? There's the rest of the world out there, and not everybody applies US law or is subject to the SEC. So we formed maybe around 2.5, 3 years ago now as a sort of a think tank, getting together, discussing and comparing different legislation in the various European jurisdictions and how the different aspects of crypto, whether it's the securities regulation, the tax, accounting, everything that's on the sort of larger legal side could be applied, or the analogies that could be made to traditional legislation that's already there within the EU. At a certain point, we formalized that by creating the association, and recently we published the regulation paper.
Yeah, so I read this paper, and so let me just, I'll quote from it. I think you say, we believe that token sales can have positive effects by providing innovators with alternative access to capital and providing consumers with opportunities to invest and participate in assets and projects which would not otherwise be available to them. So can you perhaps put that in context and explain what that means? And are we talking about, does this sort of refer to a forward environment where we're looking at more security token offerings? So like, how does this, it almost, you could read something like this in 2017 and it would apply to the old ICO model. How would you differentiate that?
Yeah. When we started chatting, it was definitely the sort of ICO, they were taking off, and then we were discussing as well as they sort of were booming away and then started to crash. But the paper we decided to look at with sort of the whole ecosystem. So we deal solidly with the securities end of the spectrum. Things like if you're an investment fund, if you want to issue tokens, if you want to purchase and invest into token offerings, if you are a company who wants to issue a bond or equities in a tokenized form. But we also looked at things like the prospectus directives and how can you adapt those to have crowdfunding type models. There's a new crowdfunding exemption in a new EU directive, which allows for smaller level offerings to be outside of certain of the regulations. And we do believe that it's the ICO model, although it was a bit flawed and certainly abused, that there are advantages to it in terms of getting startups off the ground, in terms of getting funding into companies, and also just getting the enthusiasm of the community. There is a space for crowdfunding. So we tried to address in the paper the whole spectrum, whilst not focusing, as a paper 2 years ago might have, too much on the ICO model as such.
Whether you're an enterprise fund manager or a retail trader, buying and selling cryptocurrencies successfully requires price discovery you can rely on. Brave New Coin's liquid indices provide trusted US dollar prices for Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Ripple. Featuring end-of-day or intraday outputs, you can count on the BLX, ELX, and XRPLX for accurate US dollar pricing for smart contract oracles, settlement price discovery, net asset valuation, and performance analysis. Visit bravenewcoin.com to find out more.
I suppose the Think Block Tank as an EU-based organisation, your role really is to provide policy recommendations from an EU perspective. And I think you mentioned before, making sure that it's not just the US that's leading the way here, and there are other perspectives that are valid. How would you differentiate what the European perspective is versus what's happening in the US at the moment?
Yes, I would definitely differentiate it. So I think that at both country levels and at the EU level as a whole, so European Commission, European Parliament, there have been a lot of blockchain initiatives. And I would say that across the EU as a whole, countries are very blockchain friendly. The question is how to do that within the legal frameworks and how to do it legally and in a way that's not going to disrupt either markets or have people, remortgaging their houses just because they've found some new exciting project and then they lose all of their savings. So they want it to fit within the existing regulations or to tweak those regulations to make them work so that you still have those safeguards. But the whole approach within Europe is just very different to the EU. We don't have the same types of regulators. We don't have the same types of split between different agencies and even between the states in the US. Yes, we have the national authorities and then the EU authorities. But for many of these areas, 95% of the rules are still the same because they're based on EU directives. So I would say there's a bit more harmonization, despite the fact that it is a bunch of different countries. And just the whole approach is different. The European Commission has been really, really instructive in all of this. They created what is called the EU Blockchain Observatory around 2 years ago. It should be coming to an end soon. With that, they've been studying very, very actively different topics, bringing together leading actors from across Europe, trying to get together the people who are interested in the technology, together with the big businesses, the small businesses, and to educate generally on blockchain across the EU.
Okay, and so the paper's called, by the way, The Regulation of Tokens in Europe. And I think it says something like, we are of the view that an EU-wide approach to regulation in this area is preferable to a country-by-country approach. Do you think that's accurate? Is that a good summary, and is that a good goal to work towards?
Yeah, definitely, because the thing is that it's so much stronger if you can do your business cross-border. If you have to, and this is going back to the US and the state-by-state approach, if you then have to consult with lawyers and check rules and do things differently, every time you go across a border, obviously that's a hindrance to business. And especially small businesses, startups, who they don't want to have to engage with all of that level of regulation. So if we can have an EU-wide approach, you already have one big market where you can say, these are the rules within that EU market. We can offer our services or launch our token business or our platform, which is a lot more powerful for everybody.
I agree with you, Monique, but the problem with that approach is only successful if the relevant EU-wide framework works and is a good framework. And I guess what I mean by that is, a month or two ago, you'll be familiar with Hester Peirce, probably the most vocal crypto supporter on the SEC in the US. And she said in a speech recently, she spoke out against a global framework for crypto assets. And I think her point, what she was getting at, is that if some kind of global United Nations of crypto, put together some kind of global framework, it feels like the first go round, they'll inevitably get it wrong. The incentives will be messed up. They'll misunderstand what's going on, and potentially it makes it harder for the industry to move forward. If you let all different countries or jurisdictions do their own thing, perhaps some smaller countries like Luxembourg, it gives them space to perhaps get it right, and then going forward, we can adopt the ideas from, the people that get it right and leave behind the ones that get it wrong. What do you think of her comments there?
If I break it down into a few different elements. So first of all, I think within Europe it is different because anything that is financial services related, and with crypto, because how easily you can move tokens, these do quickly become part of the financial services landscape. Anything in Europe which is financial services pretty much is already subject to EU directives. So it's based on the traditional company laws, which have been grown into securities laws over many years. So an EU approach definitely makes sense there. In other areas, it's still very much the countries who are leading. As soon as they get into an area which has already got the EU sort of umbrella over it, there's limited margin for them to act. But going beyond that on a global scale, I would agree on the global scale. So I think that within Europe, so I'm a company law expert, corporate governance expert from the traditional sense, as well as these days in the blockchain sphere. And the company laws across Europe are pretty much the same today. So if you build on that, you're building on the same sort of culture and ethos. If I would try to transpose that to an Asian country, then we would be ignoring the local laws and the laws that you're building on top of, from that region or from that country. And you probably would create more systemic risks and more other issues if you would do so. So I do think that whenever you talk governance or company laws, regulations, that you do need to also respect the cultural system that you're building on top of.
Completely agree. And Monique, as a background to all this, if we just take it back to Luxembourg, I think earlier this year, the country, they passed a bill, provides a legal framework for securities issued over the blockchain. And this is, it's a fairly forward-looking bill, and, other countries like Malta are doing the same thing. Can you perhaps explain, what is a security and what are the advantages of being able to issue securities across a blockchain framework?
So again, here in Europe, securities comes from definitions in MiFID and the prospectus directive, which is basically comes to sort of transferable securities, and then it gives various examples such as shares, bonds, debt instruments, and many other examples. What is interesting about the law such as Luxembourg? So Luxembourg, basically, with this change or this law that was passed is very short. So it's a very different approach to somewhere like Malta or Gibraltar, because Luxembourg says we don't regulate technologies, we regulate activities. But we will make sure that we've got laws to regulate the activities. And if the current laws are not working for new technologies or new possibilities that come out there, which might be things like a completely new technology like blockchain, but it could also be just new uses or new 5G you mentioned earlier, that could enable things that just due to bandwidth couldn't be done before, but that might open up new possibilities. So we say we don't regulate the technologies, we regulate the activities. And here we had an issue where the definitions in the existing law were not clear enough that we could tokenize the securities and come within the existing legislation and do in a dematerialized manner what had been able to do before in traditional sort of securities clearing and settlement and systems. So there was a little tweak to an older law, basically so that we can automate the issuance and transfer of shares. Why do we want to do that? Well, first of all, as soon as it's automated, it reduces risk. There's less manual intervention. It increases the tracking, and it should also lead to substantially decreased costs.
Do you buy into this tokenized world concept? And I think it's, if you extrapolate the tokenization of all the things idea out long enough, advantage of, security token offerings is perhaps it opens up things like bonds, real estate, and you can almost anything of real value. There's no reason why it can't be tokenized and then traded. So if you extrapolate out again, do we ever get to a world where it becomes possible to interoperable blockchains, these seamless trading platforms? Will I be able to trade my digital version of, say, a rare piece of fine art or a collectible Ferrari for a rare digital sword that I'm using in Fortnite? How far away is that?
I don't think it's that far away, but I do think that we should step back and say, just because we might be able to do some of these things, why do we want to, or should we? So, for example, we already have for a long time securitization vehicles. You can securitize assets. It's not so different a concept to hear about splitting things up and being able to tokenize them. We have never securitized down to such small levels. And there's reasons for that. And so I do really think that just because we can doesn't mean we should. And so we should always step back and say, why are we doing this? What are we adding? And there will be many cases where we say, yeah, we should. But there's others where we should really step back and say, you know what, this is not a good idea.
Yeah, you're right. Perhaps it's not going to be possible to trade small tokenized pieces of a Ferrari for a virtual Fortnite sword just yet. But I'm excited by that future, and I hope we get there.
Yeah, we return to bartering in a way.
Indeed. But virtual bartering of almost anything you can imagine with any one of the 12 billion or so people on the planet. That's got to be good, right?
I don't know if it's got to be good. I think it's interesting. I think time will tell whether it's good, and compared to, barter systems in the past where you were limited to your village or your neighboring village, clearly here you have the whole world, as you said, who you will be able to barter with. But we'll see where it ends up. But I think either way, it's really exciting.
It is exciting, Monique, but let's switch gears slightly. I understand that you're interested in technology and ethics.
Yes. So as I said, I'm a corporate lawyer and governance expert. So in my governance field, I do a lot in terms of new governance, traditional governance, teaching and thought leadership. But part of that is a lot on ethics, because in the boardrooms, it's a lot about culture. So that has gone over into my tech interests, blockchain, AI, etc. A lot of focus on ethics of these new technologies. In the blockchain sphere, that might be things also like the ethics of creating these new communities or new ecosystems, and making sure that they're fair, that they're appropriately governed, and so on. And I have to admit that as a traditional corporate governance person, my idea on governance is not always the same as those who've come at it from a purely technical workflow approach. But especially in the AI area, I'm doing a lot around AI and ethics. There's a lot of movement on putting in place, not regulations, but at least principles and different thoughts on how to make sure that AI is developed in a safe and sensible manner. And I'm not talking here just about, sort of the Armageddon AI, who's become some military bot, but also at a simple level. So, for example, as I said at the beginning, I'm involved very much in the investment fund sector as well, because that is the biggest sector in Luxembourg. If you're going to launch an algorithm to trade your fund, whether it be a hedge fund or index tracker or whatever, you need to, part of the fairness and ethics there when you're selling the product is making sure that you know what your algorithm's doing. Have you tested it? Do you know how it behaves? Are you doing back testing to make sure that it's behaving as it was initially intended? And so that would be a business example. But obviously these extend into every area that you can think of, because every single part of the AI brings up new ethics challenges, and linking this to legal responsibilities becomes more and more difficult the more autonomous the AI becomes.
That's right, Monique, and I think it is a challenge. The whole AI thing it's fascinating stuff, and I know you said let's perhaps not go too far down the AI rabbit hole, but you do have people like Elon Musk who's spoken out in the past about his worries about perhaps AI development getting just a little step ahead of where, let's say, the ethics of AI are. And, governments around the world are all probably doing their own developments in AI and pushing forward. Then you've got things like, facial recognition. China is quite advanced here. What are the ethics of those kind of systems, do you think?
In Europe, we are very into privacy. We've got our GDPR regulations, which don't always stop these uses either. There's interesting discussions going on in London at the moment with respect to privatized public spaces and facial recognition. But I think it's a good example because it's a little bit Pandora's box. Once it's out, can you put it back in? And even if you deal with ethics and you need to try to do it on a global scale, if there's one or two actors who don't go by the rules, you could have autonomous mechanisms out there which will clearly go beyond the borders of those countries. And how do you deal with that if, for example, it does get out of control in one way or another?
That's quite a scary prospect, isn't it? If you get into a situation where we've got a rogue AI on the loose and it hasn't been given the right human-friendly ethical parameters, stuff can go wrong.
I think at the moment we're okay. Most of these systems, they're very limited to one or two uses. And then there's discussions about the generalized AI, so AGI. And at that stage, especially if it's self-learning, we just don't know where it would lead.
Looking for near real-time crypto asset spot rates for everything from Tron to Monero or Doge to BNB? Brave New Coin's GWA and MWA crypto APIs calculate a fair price for over 1,500 assets and 6,000 pairs across the global network of crypto exchanges. At 30-second tick intervals and available via streaming or REST API, Brave New Coin's GWA and MWA APIs deliver independent third-party price discovery you can rely on.
Hey Monique, it's been really interesting talking to you today. I'd like to finish with a rapid fire round of crypto hot takes. Are you up for it?
Okay.
Monique Bachner, where do you sit on the Bitcoin maximalist to multi-coin opportunist spectrum?
Oh, I'm opportunistic.
Nice. Monique, what do you think is blockchain's killer app?
Crypto and automation.
Monique, if you were Satoshi and you had the opportunity to redeploy the Bitcoin blockchain today, what's one change you would make?
Easier seed phrases? No. I think the Bitcoin blockchain has been good. It has withstanded all of the attacks over time and has remained secure. I think it is fit for its purpose. There are scalability issues, but I think that he did a good job.
Could not agree more. Monique, what would you say is your firmest conviction crypto opinion?
So going back to the maximalists and the different ecosystems and the people who are out there for the political beliefs. So the laws do apply, the regulations do apply. This is not a new paradigm so that nothing applies. We need to make these work together, and if we can accept that, I think that we can mainstream all of these applications and possibilities a lot quicker.
Nice. Monique, Facebook's LibreCoin, good or bad for the crypto ecosystem, and why?
Ooh, so good because it's given a lot of publicity. It's been a great teaching opportunity to many, many governments and has got a lot of attention from mainstream business as well as regulators and governments, but not a fan.
Monique, let's get your EU perspective. Who is going to win the American presidential election 2020?
Oh, I'm not even going down that rabbit hole.
Not going to touch that one. I do not blame you. Monique, Bill Gates famously said, we tend to overestimate what we can accomplish in 2 years and underestimate what we can accomplish in 10. What does the blockchain space look like in 10 years?
Oh, we've taken over the world. Everything is automated. It's one big DAO. No, just seriously, I think that we'll be building, solidly on what we have started here. I think the blockchain will be the backbone infrastructure in many, many sectors.
I love it. Monique, William Gibson said the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed. What's an example of the future being here right now, but most people are not aware of it?
I think a lot of the AI, they're just not aware of a lot of the machine learning that's going on around them and the different implications.
Monique, let's zoom out. What is the long-term future for the human race? Do you see dystopia or utopia?
Oh, this is a horrible question. I actually see a little bit of dystopia because I do believe in climate change and I'm a bit worried about that.
Yeah, hey, look, good answer. You're the first person actually to raise the prospect of climate change, and I think it's it's one of the big ones, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right, not to end on a downer, but Monique, finally, what is your favourite science fiction book, film, or show?
I don't know, E.T.
Phone home. Yes, it's a classic E.T. All right. Hey, thank you so much, Monique. Please, the microphone is yours. Tell the listeners how they can find you on your various platforms, any websites you want to promote. Go for gold.
Yeah, hi. So Monique Bachner, based in Luxembourg, a lawyer, governance expert and consultant. I guess best to find me is on my LinkedIn or just on my Twitter, @Monique Bachner.
Thank you, Monique. Wow, that was fun. Hey, look, if you listened this far, you've made it to the end. That's great. We really appreciate you listening. If you're an Apple user, we would love it if you could give us a rating on the Apple Podcasts app or on iTunes. Tap the 5 stars, smash the subscribe button. Please even feel free to leave us a review. If you'd like to download or read any of the papers we mentioned that Monique helped author, go to thinkblocktank.org. This was the Crypto Conversation for Brave New Coin.